Picture the hush of an oak-paneled courtroom as a stern judge barks the command we all grew up with, stand when you speak. Then out of the rows rises a silver-haired guardsman in scarlet tunic leaning heavily on a mahogany cane. Every ribbon on his chest whispers of coronations, blackout nights, and Beatles mornings, yet what he utters next freezes the gavel mid-air and draws tears from men paid never to flinch. If you've ever wondered where real dignity hides once the knees ache, the world hurries, and the uniform no longer fits, stay right here. In the next few minutes, you'll hear words that could march you straight back to ration books national service and the day the post-war sun finally rose. Click the thumbs up, press, subscribe, and ring that little bell, because we're about to prove that courage doesn't retire, it simply finds a new parade ground for stories that honor your generation every single day. The fluorescent hum of Westminster Magistrates Court lingered like a headache as dawn mist pressed against Victorian stone, refusing to yield to electric light. Down the corridor, clerks in polyester robes and security men with cardboard coffee paused when they noticed the man in scarlet. Sergeant Nathaniel Dre Silver at the temples, lined by an old scar medals winking beneath harsh bulbs, stood as still as any statue. 26 years in the Coldstream Guards had taught him to breathe so softly the world forgot he was there. But today, the world could not look away. The red tunic felt heavier than parade wool. Inside its seams lay sleepless nights, counting pulses of pain in his right leg. Against that leg rested a mahogany cane, silver-capped, a gift from comrades who once urged medical retirement after a knife severed a nerve 6 years earlier. Dre had refused because tradition does not change its centuries simply because they limp. His solicitor, Joanna clenched sharp as a freshly pressed crease slipped from an office and murmured, "Accommodation papers are filed. Judge Pryor can be testy, but he must accept disability." Dre nodded. Debate was needless. He had stood 5 hours beside a gun carriage bearing a queen. He could sit 5 minutes to confirm a petty theft. Yet corridors are not parade grounds, and civilians rarely grasp the price of stillness. A court officer swept past, muttering, "This isn't Buckingham Palace, loud enough to sting, soft enough to dodge reprimand." Dre did not flinch. He had endured worse drunken chance pranksters' January sleet that welded brass buttons to flesh. 8 a.m. The door to courtroom 2 groaned like a drawbridge, and Joanna touched his elbow, the only gesture he allowed. Dre inhaled polished dust and distant river fog, then advanced. Each tap of his cane echoed not the crisp rattle of a drum, but the measured tick of resolve. Observers turned, drawn by the contrast, a ceremonial giant moving at civilian speed. The bearskin hat under his arm looked mythic in fluorescent glow, a shard of state occasion wandering into bureaucracy. At the threshold, he paused, squaring shoulders under invisible weight, and exhaled the way a soldier does before stepping from drill square into live fire. Whatever waited beyond procedure, ego, perhaps vindication, he would meet it on his terms. Then he entered. A hush followed him, rolling down the hall like the slow ripple on a parade ground. After the order, company attention, silence reigned. Courtroom 2 was smaller than television suggests, carpet, threadbare walls, beige. Fluorescent tubes buzzed as Dre advanced, cane ticking like a pocket watch. Conversations died. A reporter lowered his phone. Dre settled in the witness box, resting the bearskin hat on the table as though it were a flag. The chair squeaked an undignified noise against heavy silence. Joanna stacked her papers with ritual care eyes on the judge's door. It opened as the clerk called, "All rise for his honor, Judge Malcolm Pryor." Pryor entered, broad-shouldered hair, military, short, authority preceding him. Everyone stood except the guardsman. Dre inclined his head, legs angled to dull the lightning in his hip. A small frown crossed Pryor's face. "Be seated," he ordered. When the room settled, he announced, "Continuation of sentencing case 247C. Witness present, Sergeant Nathaniel Dre Coldstream, Guards." Joanna rose, but Pryor raised a hand. "One question first. Sergeant, when this court rose, you remained seated. Why the gallery inhaled?" Dre replied, "Medical accommodation filed 3 days ago. Your Honor, I have not seen it. It exists." Pryor steepled his fingers. "Does this condition prevent you from showing proper respect to the bench?" The word condition felt like a gavel. Dre answered, "It prevents me from standing without significant pain. Respect is intact." Pryor signaled the clerk, who shuffled documents. Joanna tried again. A sharp gesture silenced her. Attention centered on the lone guardsman read against drab walls still as the cenotaph on Remembrance Sunday. They underestimated a man who had once stood 12 hours in sleet because protocol required it. Pryor's eyebrow arched curiosity, wrestling with authority. "Explain," he murmured. Dre's voice stayed low, the cadence of parade commands slowed for civility. 26 years I have stood through monsoon rain at horse guards, through the icy dawn of royal funerals, through crowds who test resolve for amusement. I sit today because a blade 6 years ago cut more than flesh. It severed the signal between will and muscle. Pain is now my drill sergeant. It dictates when I rise. Yet etiquette survives intact. I remove my hat. I face the bench. I reported for duty on time. That is respect. Pryor leaned back, robes settling like drawn curtains. "We will locate these papers," he said at last, but his voice had lost its earlier edge. Dre breathed in steady rhythm, every exhale, a small victory over a nerve that refused to heal. Pryor studied the guardsman as though recalibrating the very shape of authority. "Sergeant Dre," he said, "what injury keeps you seated today?" Dre answered steady and plain. 6 years ago, outside the palace gates, a man with a knife rushed a school group. I stepped between. The blade severed the femoral nerve in my hip. The children went home safe. I spent 4 months relearning how to walk. Joanna pushed the medical file forward. Stamped copies confirmed every scar and surgery. Pryor scanned, then lifted his gaze. "This court acknowledges your service and sacrifice." Proceedings resumed. Dre's statement detailed Marcus Webb's circling of tourists, the snatch, the shove, that fractured an elderly wrist, the arrest by police. Pryor weighed precedent, then addressed the thin 19-year-old desperation earns no license to injure. Sentenced 12 months suspended, 300 hours community service counseling. Yet the deeper verdict unfolded in silence. As Pryor rose, the court officer who had scoffed earlier sprang to attention. The clerk, stenographer, and gallery followed, forming an unwritten guard of honor. At the chamber door, Pryor paused, met Dre's eyes, and said, "Thank you for your service, all of it." Dre stood in an answer cane-grounded body, uncoiling by inches until upright. Outside, gray London hummed indifferent yet eternal. A curious child approached, handshake solemn. "Does it hurt?" the boy asked, glancing at the cane. "Sometimes," Dre said, "but not as much as not serving would." He stepped into a black cab, rooftops gliding past like sentry posts he had once guarded. In the glass, he saw uniform and scars, but also something newly won, assurance that dignity lives in the choices we keep when comfort leaves. He watched the city heartbeat match his own steady, unresolved enduring. The cab rolled into traffic with the slow confidence of a lifeboat easing from a great ship, and London unfolded like a battered ceremonial scroll. Nathaniel watched the mall slide past plane trees and regimented lines, Union flags unmoving in the still air, each landmark a silent comrade that had stood post beside him through decades of duty. Buckingham Palace glimmered briefly behind iron railings and camera flashes. He recalled nights when the facade lay ghost pale under floodlights, and he motionless counted seconds between drizzle and clock chime. At Horse Guards Parade, a squad of young troopers drilled boots, striking gravel in the old heartbeat. Left, right, left. Their crisp cadence pierced the taxi glass, stirring the ache in his hip, yet kindling something warmer, proof that the line held even when individual sentries faltered. The driver's mirror caught his gaze. "Big morning, sir," the man asked, half London curiosity, half cabbie intuition. Nathaniel offered the spare smile of veterans who have no wish to recount battles. A reminder, he said, that respect wears many uniforms. They crossed the Thames on Lambeth Bridge, where gulls wheeled above grey water. Nathaniel's reflection hovered beside Parliament's castellations medals, flashing like small votive candles. He thought of the judge of the moment. Pryor's voice shed its iron casing, revealing a man instead of a gavel. Change, he reflected, arrives not with drums, but with quiet recognition, one listener at a time. Past the hospital where he'd relearned to walk, he remembered parallel bars lacquered with sweat. In frustration, physiotherapists measuring progress in centimeters, while comrades measured it in stories of courage. The cab paused at lights. A bus crowded with pensioners on day excursion idled beside them. A woman in floral blouse spotted the scarlet tunic, nudged her husband, and raised a thumb in silent salute. He returned the gesture with 2 fingers pressed to brow, salute the Queen herself would have found regulation. Traffic flowed again, weaving history and present into seamless cloth. He caught sight of St. Paul's Dome, that wartime beacon, and sensed the city whispering, "Keep moving. Old soldier, the watch has not ended." In that murmur, he clarified his own resolve. Service, he realized, was not confined to drill squares. It continued in every conversation that defended decency, every stance, seated or standing, that shielded the vulnerable. The taxi turned toward Chelsea's quieter streets, and the weight of scarlet wool shifted on his shoulders from burden to banner. The cab deposited him before a brick Victorian conversion whose modest facade belied the quiet fraternity within Royal Navy warrant officers, RAF sergeants, an army nurse who still ironed pillowcase edges sharp as runway lights. Nathaniel's cane clicked up the stone steps, each impact chiming like a subdued parade drum. Inside his flat, the afternoon light sifted through lace curtains, dust motes orbiting as if time itself slowed to stand guard. First ritual bearskin on its wooden stand, chin strap strewed, fur brushed smooth. It seemed to breathe once freed from his arm, as though grateful for domestic furlough. Second tunic unbuttoned with care, each polished brass disc turned like a chronometer to mark the end of watch. The scarlet cloth exhaled parade ground aromas, Brasso wool, faint gun oil, and he hung it in the wardrobe beside a dozen identical twins, all pressed to ceremonial perfection. Medals were uncoupled, settled into velvet recesses of a presentation case. Their absence left his chest lighter, but the room heavier weighted by stories embedded in each ribbon weave. Third ritual, he loosened the black tie and eased into a chair by the window leg, elevated on a hassock. Pain pulsed, persistent yet familiar, a metronome reminding him that sacrifice had a monthly interest rate. From this vantage, he surveyed the small communal garden, where last summer a handful of veterans barbecued sausages while arguing over which regiment brewed the strongest tea. He remembered laughter joining drizzle on canvas awnings and thought how shared mirth welded fractured spirits better than any metal. On the side table lay his leather-bound notebook, the unofficial logbook every guardsman kept. He clicked a fountain pen and began recording the morning court coordinates, date, case number, names, but also intangibles. Pryor's initial frost. Joanna's steadfast presence, the boy's handshake like a tiny oath. Words marched across paper in neat ranks until the incident lived secure beyond failing memory. When he reached the line, "I stood because it mattered," the pen paused, a tear unexpected blurred ink into blue vignette. He wiped it away with soldier's briskness, yet allowed himself the luxury of finishing the page before closing the book with ceremonial finality. Outside, a delivery van backfired, startling a pigeon flock skyward. Their sudden arc etched the thought he dared not voice that dignity, like those birds rises higher when jolted from complacency. Evening seeped over Chelsea rooftops, street lamps flickering on like sentry lanterns, and the city's undertones shifted from commerce to contemplation. Nathaniel brewed a psalm in a mug embossed with regimental crest steam curling into the dimming room. He settled back cane across his lap like a drum major's baton at rest and let memory spool. He recalled the long vigil beside the Queen's coffin, the muffled drums that beat as if echoing the nation's own heart. He recalled random tourists laughing when drizzle streaked his bare skin, unaware of the vow that rooted his boots. All those moments converged into the words he had spoken to prior: respect is not measured by posture. The phrase felt truer now than when first uttered, broad enough to shelter hospital porters, single mothers and aging cabbies, anyone who pressed on despite invisible wounds. A vibration rattled the phone on his desk, Joanna's message. Press already asking for quote. Told them you wouldn't comment. He typed thanks, then hesitated before adding, if they ask again, tell them courage needs no commentary. He sent it, set the device face down, and listened to the building's heartbeat, distant television laughter, muffled footfall, the neighbor's kettle whistle, a civilian symphony, more convincing than any fanfare. He thought of Marcus Webb beginning community service tomorrow, scrubbing graffiti perhaps, or sorting tins at a food bank. Nathaniel hoped the boy would glimpse the same truth the judge had. Strength is not in the grab, but in the release, not in the shout, but the steady voice. Tea cooled. He rose to switch on a lamp, testing weight on the damaged leg. Pain sparked, but he refused the habitual curse. Instead, he recited the guard's motto, Nulli secundus, second to none. Not a boast, he mused, but a reminder to place honor first, even when circumstances consign you to rear guard. At the window, he watched headlights slide along wet pavement, each beam a fleeting torch in an unbroken relay of duty, stretching back centuries. Somewhere another sentinel raised arms in salute, another judge weighed mercy against law, another child asked if service hurts. And in that vast, unchoreographed parade, he felt perfectly placed, even seated cane in hand. Outside his door, the walking stick awaited tomorrow's march. Inside, his chest resolve clicked to parade rest, not dismissed, merely waiting for the next call to stand, if not on two legs, then on unshakable principle. Dawn threaded pale gold through the lace curtains, and Nathaniel woke before the alarm body timed to decades of early reveille. His hip protested as he swung his legs over the mattress, the ache now a familiar roommate rather than an enemy. In the kitchen, the kettle clicked, its hiss overlaying the distant rumble of buses starting their routes. He tapped the radio on. The newsreader's clipped accent mentioned yesterday's extraordinary exchange at Westminster, but he switched stations before his own name surfaced. Attention was a parade ground floodlight, useful for ceremony, harsh on private skin. Tea in hand, he opened his notebook, intending to review the day's physio exercises, yet instead he found himself sketching the courtroom. Pryor's stern brow softening, Joanna's relieved sigh, the young thief's hollow eyes filling with something like gratitude at leniency. The sketch resembled a battlefield map, lines of authority, flanks of empathy, reminding him that though he could no longer march, he still maneuvered. At 9, he donned civilian clothes, pressed chinos, and a wool blazer whose inside pocket held his service ID like a medal out of uniform. The cane clicked along Chelsea pavements toward the Royal Hospital gym, where veterans met physiotherapists sporting tattoos of regimental crests faster than any rank slide. Inside, the air smelled of liniment and determination. Ralph, a former Royal Marine with carbon fiber prostheses, greeted him with a mock salute. Morning, Guardsman Herod, you gave a judge drill square lessons. Nathaniel chuckled, then grimaced as Ellie the physio arrived, cheerful mercenary of pain. She guided him through leg swings and resistance bands, counting repetitions like a metronome. Each pull of muscle felt like restitching torn cloth, but he pushed on, aware that strength was currency he would need tomorrow as much as years ago. Between sets, he overheard Ralph mutter respect to a new arrival, and realized the courtroom story had already migrated through veteran networks, gaining embellishments, the way campfire tales always do. He considered correcting details. There had been no dramatic standoff, just measured words, but decided myth could serve purpose, lighting dark corners where wounded pride lurked. After cool down, Ellie handed him a reminder card, outreach talk at a local school next Wednesday. They want a guardsman, she said conspiratorially, and real service insight. The card fluttered in his palm like a summons. He accepted, understanding that duty often chose its own routes back to the century. Outside, autumn sunlight washed the courtyard, casting long shadows that converged at his feet.
A simple click on that subscribe button might seem small, but to me, it means the world. If this content made you smile, feel inspired, or just brought you a little joy, hit that sub button and stay with me for more good vibes ahead.
Nathaniel set his cane forward, left, right, the cadence imperfect, yet unbroken, and resumed the day's march toward unforeseen posts. Mid-afternoon found him at a modest cafe overlooking Sloane Square, a place where baristas knew regulars' backstories better than drinks orders. He sat by the window, steaming bowl of tomato soup, warming his hands, when a young woman approached, press badge clipped to her lapel. Sergeant Dre, I'm Eleanor Shaw from the Telegraph. May I sit? He considered refusal, but her earnestness softened the instinct. She placed a recorder between them, yet did not press play. Off the record first, she said, yesterday I saw something rare. A room changed shape around a single sentence. I'd like readers to understand why. Nathaniel lifted an eyebrow. Journalists usually sought spectacle, not context. Still, candor, like drill, could be disciplined. He spoke of service as continuity, how standing motionless in torrential rain taught focus, how ceremonial precision anchored national memory, and how a blade's flash one October morning redirected that devotion inward, forcing him to guard dignity from within. Eleanor listened, jotting notes, yet letting silences breathe. When he finished, she asked, "What does respect mean after pain?" He sipped his soup, searching for phrasing precise enough to survive print. It's recognizing value that hasn't vanished just because the surface cracked, he said. You honor the porcelain not by hiding the fracture, but by seeing the tea still steams. She nodded, recorder now running. He allowed one anecdote, the boy's handshake outside the courthouse, the uncomplicated gratitude that reminded him why he stayed in uniform when retirement beckoned. After an hour, she clicked stop. I won't sensationalize, she promised. I'll write about endurance, not courtroom drama. Nathaniel smiled. Write about choosing to serve again each morning. He added, even if service is one measured step to the kettle. They parted with a handshake that echoed the child's, and as she disappeared into commuter flow, he felt oddly lighter, as if testimony transferred weight. Across the square, a bus shelter poster advertised a military charity, Invisible Wounds Need Visible Allies. He touched the cane's silver cap, an ally rendered visible, and understood the story now moved beyond his control, walking on pages, marching in headlines, perhaps inspiring someone unseen. He paid the bill, thanked the waiter by name, and stepped back into a city that, for all its haste, paused enough to hold his reflection in 1,000 shop windows, scarlet memory trailing a civilian present. Evening's first stars pricked the smoky sky when the call arrived, a ringtone he kept reserved for barracks numbers. "Color Sergeant Bateman here, sir," came the crisp voice of the duty adjutant. Formalities aside, Bateman conveyed unexpected news. The Household Division planned a small presentation at Wellington Barracks, unofficial but meaningful, recognizing continued exemplary conduct despite injury. Nathaniel's initial reaction was reluctance. Medals already glinted in his drawer, and ceremony risked tipping private resolve into public pageantry. Yet Bateman, sensing hesitation, added, "It's the lads, sir. They'd like you to see the new intake. Let them hear it from someone who bled for the bearskin." That reframed the matter. Recruits learning the weight of tradition deserve truth unmarbled by myth. He accepted, penciling Tuesday 1,500 hours into his notebook. The promise stirred both pride and apprehension. He would need to stand not parade ground rigid, but upright enough to let young eyes measure aspiration. Determined, he reviewed Ellie's exercise sheet, adding extra stretches to the next mornings. Later, as he prepared supper, his television blinked alive with an evening bulletin, a still image of him in court cane beside uniform. Headline reading, "Guardsman's quiet defiance redefines respect." The presenter summarized events with surprising restraint, quoting Eleanor Shaw's article draft about courage wearing civilian shoes. Nathaniel muted the set, pondering ripples he could no longer chart. A knock interrupted. Mrs. Patel from 2 doors down offered leftover biryani fragrant with cardamom. She mentioned her teenage grandson had watched the news clip twice, asking why a soldier would choose pain over retirement. "I told him," she said, eyes proud, "some uniforms stay under the skin." Nathaniel thanked her warmth, spreading quicker than spice. Alone again, he ate at the kitchen counter, mind rehearsing the words he might share with recruits, that commitment survives applause, that standing isn't always vertical, that a nation's heartbeat can be counted in the quiet between a judge's command and a guardsman's reply. Outside the courtyard, lamplight bowed through drizzle, and he opened the window to breathe petrichor mingled with distant drill drums. Tomorrow's pain would come, but tonight dignity stood sentry, unblinking over a scar that had ceased to define and begun to illuminate. Tuesday dawned steel blue and windless, the kind of morning that made flagpoles impatient for color. Nathaniel's leg throbbed before his feet found the floor, but physiotherapy had gifted him a new habit: greet pain first, then the day. By 8:30, he stood tie straight, blazer pressed at the gate of St. Oswald's Primary. Ellie's outreach card had understated the anticipation. A corridor of handmade posters welcomed the real Queen's Guard. Inside the hall, 100 children sat cross-legged, their chatter fading to awed hush as he stepped onto the low stage. He rested the cane against a lectern the size of a music stand and told them stories calibrated for young ears, how discipline begins with making beds, how courage often looks like patience, how medals are metal until actions give them weight. Yet it was the Q&A that lit the room. A girl asked whether standing still was lonely. He admitted it could be, then described how sharing duty with silent comrades created unspoken conversation. A boy in a wheelchair asked if soldiers ever sit on parade. Nathaniel leaned on his cane, met the lad's eyes, and replied, "They do when standing would betray the body more than honor the flag." Teachers exchanged glances as the hall inhaled that sentence. Before leaving, he let pupils pass the bearskin, and from lap to lap, gasp rippled at its heft. The headmistress whispered that the children would remember the weight long after the words. Outside, parents waiting at gates applauded. He felt the odd reversal of roles, an army of civilians saluting a single sentinel. Back in the taxi, he replayed the wheelchair boy's question. Service, he realized, had just bridged two seats, one on a parade square, one in a classroom, without shedding an ounce of respect. At 14:57, Nathaniel entered Wellington Barracks, the archway swallowing traffic noise and releasing a cadence of drill commands echoing across the square. Fresh recruits in slate gray greatcoats braced as he passed. Their eyes flickered toward the seasoned scarlet that now seemed almost mythic. Inside the sergeant's mess, a half-circle of officers, NCOs, and medics assembled. The informal citation read by Colonel Ashcroft praised undaunted adherence to duty, exemplifying the Guard's motto in courts as on forecourts. When the colonel pinned a small enamel brooch, a silver cane crossed over a bearskin, onto Nathaniel's lapel, applause rolled out like a volley, restrained yet resonant. He spoke briefly, voice calm but carrying, reminded recruits that the brilliance of brass is worthless if the character beneath dulls. That pain is inevitable, purpose optional. That tradition is a living drill manual, written anew by every imperfect parade. Then, breaking protocol, he lifted the cane shoulder high in salute, an unspoken creed that even altered limbs could still present arms. Later, over tea served in mess china, a recruit admitted he'd considered opting for ceremonial instead of active service because real fighting scares me. Nathaniel sipped and answered, "Front-line shift, lad. Sometimes they run straight through a courtroom." The recruit straightened as if his spine had heard an unseen bugle. Twilight found Nathaniel crossing the square, scarlet darkening to burgundy brooch, catching the last gleam. The wind finally rose, and the flags answered, erupting into full billow like a cheer no voice could match. That evening, he returned to Chelsea by Riverbus the Thames, wearing its night silk sheen. Standing at the rail, he watched landmarks drift past like chapters St. Paul's Tower Bridge, the shard of modern glass beside the fortress of old stone, each structure a sentence in the long story he served. His hip ached, yet within the ache pulsed a quieter energy, as if marrow had stored applause for later release. On the pier, a news notification pinged, editorial, "Why a seated soldier stands taller than a judge." He muted it, knowing messages would keep marching without him. At home, he logged the day, spoke to 112 children, accepted honor on behalf of all who keep watch in pain, confirmed front lines invisible. He closed the notebook, placed the silver-capped cane against the door, ready for dawn, and drew the curtains. London city beat muffled to a distant drum, but inside the flat reverberated a steadier rhythm. One man, one promise, still on patrol. Before sleeping, he set an alarm for 05:30, same as always. Not because parade awaited, but because consistency itself is a form of sentry duty. In the dark, he whispered the ancient watchword, "All's well," and believed it. For tomorrow, the world would again command. Stand when you speak, and he would rise not on unflinching legs, perhaps, but on an unbroken will, proving once more that dignity can march farther than muscle, and that some guards, even seated, remain second to none. Thursday's gray mid-morning settled like soot over Lambeth when Nathaniel set out for a modest brick community center, where Marcus Webb now served his sentence, stacking donations for a food bank. Joanna had sent the schedule, thinking closure might heal both witness and defendant. Nathaniel wrestled with doubt, was confrontation mercy or vanity, but the cane tapped rhythmically, drawing him forward. Inside, fluorescent panels buzzed above aisles of dented tins and frayed carrier bags. Marcus' thin shoulders, hunched beneath a high-vis vest, glanced up, eyes widening, at the scarlet blazer. For a heartbeat, the young man froze, grief and embarrassment flickering like faulty filament. Nathaniel broke the silence. "Most of us fear the darkest deed we've done is the only story we'll be allowed to tell." Marcus swallowed, nodding. They worked side by side, lifting crates onto metal shelves. Sweat beaded Nathaniel's brow. Each bend inflamed the hip, but he made no sound. After 20 minutes, he asked why the handbag. Marcus whispered of overdue rent, a sister's inhaler wage, slips lost to zero-hour whims, circumstances, not excuses. Nathaniel listened with parade ground stillness, then spoke of choices, the knife that changed his nerve path yet sharpened his purpose. The courtroom moment where standing had nothing to do with legs. "You can't unwrite an act," he said, placing a final crate, "but every next action edits the reader's eye." The supervisor called break, offering tea and chipped mugs. Marcus hesitated, then produced a neatly folded sheet, Judge Pryor's sentencing order signed at the bottom by both men. Could you? He stammered. Nathaniel uncapped a pen and wrote, "We are measured not by first failure, but by final resolve. Keep shelving hope." Marcus's shoulders eased, a breath not carried since arrest escaped. As Nathaniel left, a pair of elderly volunteers saluted thumbs to foreheads, copying schoolchildren who had seen the news. Outside, drizzle began thin as typewriter ribbon. Pain bit harder, yet something lighter threaded through it, the knowledge that even an injured guard could still redirect a life trajectory by merely showing up without judgment. In the cab home, he reread his notebook line, "Front lines invisible," and amended "Front lines mobile today" at aisle 7 between baked beans and regret. The Thames slid past, indifferent but constant, mirroring his conviction that service thrives wherever dignity is rationed and respect can still be stacked, like tins for those who arrive hungry for it. The public narrative accelerated over the weekend. Eleanor's article topped digital charts, spawning commentary from columnists, veterans, disability advocates. Some praised courtroom courage. Others debated whether ceremonial troops soaked up resources better spent on modern defense. Nathaniel refused broadcast invitations, choosing the quieter battlefield of correspondence. Letters arrived in bundles. A war widow who'd hidden her Vicane at memorials now vowed to walk proudly. A retired bus conductor recalling blitz nights when scarlet tunics patrolled blackout streets. A young cadet in Leicester asking how to polish character as brightly as brass. Nathaniel answered each by fountain pen, the act meditative ink, looping like drill square arcs. Monday brought unexpected payload, a cream-sealed envelope stamped with the royal cipher. Inside, a personal note from Queen Camilla, handwritten, "Thanks for embodying enduring values of constancy and compassion," plus an invitation to a small garden reception at Clarence House. Shock slowed his pulse. He traced the cursive as though confirming reality by touch. Yet the greater jolt arrived that afternoon when Ellie the physio wheeled in a prototype carbon composite leg brace commissioned quietly by regimental medics. Sleek mat weighing half his cane's silver top, it promised reduced strain. Fitting required hours of alignment straps and micro-adjustments, but when he stood, weight redistributed along engineered ribs, pain ebbed to a dull ember. He managed 5 unassisted steps across the rehab floor. Ralph the Marine thumped parallel bars in applause. Ellie photographed the moment, scarlet blazer, new brace, and Nathaniel allowed the image to exist not for headlines, but for recruits wrestling futures. That evening, candles lit the communal garden for an impromptu gathering of residents. Mrs. Patel played Bollywood classics on a tinny speaker. The Navy warrant officer grilled sausages. Laughter eddied under fairy lights. Nathaniel, seated amid folding chairs, felt community wrap around military solitude like a second uniform. When asked to say a few words, he stood slow but braced and raised his mug of ginger beer. To standing, he toasted in whatever form keeps the flag flying. Cheers rang, the brace held firm. Later, alone at his desk, he penned in the notebook, "Innovation aids endurance, but intent is still the strongest alloy." He marked the date, another kind of metal, unpinned, yet glowing in the quiet. Spring edged into early summer. Horse chestnuts bloomed along the mall as Clarence House prepared for the reception. Nathaniel dressed with ceremonial precision, tunic scarlet. Trousers, midnight metals aligned so precisely their edges could slice out. He paused, hand on the carbon brace concealed beneath tailored wool, then lifted the cane still polished. Still emblem as companion rather than crutch. At the palace gates, a young officer saluted. Inside, manicured lawns hosted small knots of guests, hospice volunteers, conservation biologists, a Gurkha whose avalanche rescue had saved trekkers. Conversation drifted like bees between lavender beds, but a hush rippled when Queen Camilla approached Nathaniel. Her handshake felt warm grounding. "Sergeant Dre," she said, eyes earnest. "Your courtroom stand reminded Britain why ceremony matters." He replied, "Ceremony is the story, service is the plot." She laughed, then introduced him to the Lord Chancellor, who asked about adapting court protocols nationwide. Nathaniel suggested simple reforms, disability briefings for judges, adjustable witness boxes, a reminder that respect and posture are not synonyms. Afternoon sun angled low. The military band struck gentle chords, not marches, but folk airs echoing across stone. Nathaniel found a seat beneath a plane tree, letting conversation ebb. Nearby, recruits from his earlier talk mingled with garden volunteers. Cross-pollination of service blossomed before his eyes. He realized legacy wasn't stored in museums or scrolls, but in these unscripted exchanges where tradition passed hand to hand like a torch. When the event concluded, Queen Camilla presented each honoree a single white rose symbolizing quiet valor. Nathaniel tucked the stem across his tunic buttons. The scent mingled with brasso and summer grass. Exiting the grounds, he faced evening traffic crowding the mall. For a moment, he considered calling a cab, then adjusted the brace and decided to walk. Each step was deliberate yet freer than months before cane-tapping cadence against royal asphalt. Tourist parted phones raised, but he kept eyes forward, measuring progress in lamppost intervals rather than applause. At Admiralty Arch, he paused, looking back at the palace silhouetted in sunset glow. The rose's petals fluttered against red wool like a silent flag. He raised the cane in salute not to monarchy alone, but to every courtroom, school hall, food bank aisle where dignity had taken station. Turning towards St. James's Park, he disappeared into the city's pulse, a sentinel still on duty, even seated, even braced, proving anew that the longest watch is kept, not by unbending muscle, but by the resolute heart that will, when challenged, to always find a way to rise. Thank you so much for watching till the end. Your support truly means the world to me. If this video brought you value or resonated with you in any way, feel free to leave a little comment or hit subscribe so we can keep sharing more moments together. See you in the next one.